If you're only voting for me because I'm a woman, I would rather not have your vote. You vote for me because of the politics that I carry. If the only reason I'm voting for somebody is because they are Arab or because they are Muslim, that's simply not good enough. That's not enough to be considered a comrade. Where do you stand on political issues? And let's talk about the politics. So again, if the only thing is that we share an ethnicity, unfortunately, that's not enough.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
Visit sumudpod.com to subscribe and connect with us on social media. Consider supporting our work through a contribution on the Support Us page.
On this episode of the Sumud Podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Dr. Rania Masri. Dr. Masri is an environmental scientist, justice advocate, and lifelong organizer. Since 1990, she has fought wars and oppression through protest, teaching, testimony, and movement building. Today, as co-director of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, she calls us to solidarity, to liberation, and to strive together as mother trees. Welcome to the podcast, Rania.
Welcome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I have to tell you, I've had so many people request that we have you on. Mark Elabrano was the most recent, obviously, to really ask us, but many, many people have requested it. Thank you so much for taking the time out today.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
So I want to start out with, by the way, are you going to ArabCon this year?
I'm still debating. It's going to be tough. So thus far, likely not, but it's unsure stuff.
Okay. So ADC's ArabCon is at the end of September. For those who are watching and listening, please do attend if you're open to it. That's where I first learned about you, Rania. And specifically, I got a very good glimpse into your passion and your heart for doing what's right. So I want to open with you and your comments towards Ruwa Rahman. And specifically, she was on a panel with other individuals. You stood up and you spoke up. I'm going to hand it over to you, but I do want to be very clear for the audience. This is not for us to create additional fissures in the relationship or create drama. I just think that this is an important conversation that our community has to have that we haven't been having. We are going to play the video just so you know for the podcast.
My name is Rania Masri from the swing state of North Carolina. Ruwa, you were asked a very specific question, and you marvelously evaded the answer by talking about state and not the president.
No, I didn't.
You said that you are still waiting for a response from Kamala Harris. I think her statements in the debate and the platform were very clear that she will continue to support the genocide.
Yep.
And she will continue to propagate Zionist lies. But it's not only that you are continuing to defend a genocider, you are doing worse on Twitter. Because here you have said that we are being pushed to a binary choice. You are pushing us to a binary choice because on social media, you have been attacking the choice that we have, which is presidential candidate Jill Stein. You have called our presidential candidate vile by rejecting genocide. You have called her not strategic because she dares to campaign in swing states. My question to you is, when our people in Palestine are refusing to raise the white flag of surrender, when our people in Palestine are refusing to accept crumbs, why are you? And if you want to hold on to the genocider, please at least do not attack those of us who refuse to bow down to the Democratic presidential candidate and rather want to be a dignified choice.
So I'm going to hand it over to you. Walk us through it if you're okay with it.
Sure. So at the ADC convention last year, and by the way, I've been a member of the ADC for decades. So at the ADC convention last year that was held in Dearborn, they had a panel of representatives, local representatives, and I believe they were all Democrats. I'm not 100% sure. One of the speakers, Ru'a, problematic. And I would say problematic because she was the main voice at the DNC convention, in which she said, you know, all we want was just, let's have a Palestinian voice, and then we will vote Democrat if we just have a Palestinian voice at the convention. And since the convention, she had been going online, not only trying to rally support for Kamala Harris in her bid for presidency, but also raising attention against Jill Stein by making accusations against Jill Stein. So these three elements brought together and having this individual put up on the panel encouraged me to make sure that there would be time for a question and answer, that the individuals who claim to represent us as Arabs need to actually represent the issues that we hold dear. I am not a fan of identity politics. To me, what makes an individual my representatives is if they represent my politics, not if they simply represent my ethnicity. So I wanted to hear what Ru'a would have to say, and I wanted to put those positions up front, in front of everybody. And hearing the response from the ADC community, from the folks that were in the room, hearing the thunderous applause to the question, I think made it clear where we as ADC members stand on this issue. That I can comfortably say that the majority of us do care more about politics than we care about identity, and that we do want to hold our representatives to task when they claim a position that is not within our own political values.
So just to play devil's advocate, what
Please
if I
do, yes.
said, Rania, maybe it would have been better to take her to the side and have the conversation and rather than doing that publicly? That was originally, just so you know, my thought until I learned more about it. In fact, I was like, ooh, I'm not going to mess with Rania. That's a compliment to you because, again, your passion. I just never want to make you mad, to be clear. But did you have a conversation with her? Did you
No.
attempt to? No?
No, I didn't. When one is a public persona, when one is taking a position publicly and one has made that position several times publicly, then I believe that that person deserves the respect of being confronted publicly. And particularly given Ru'a's response to my question, she completely diverted it. She didn't even say, yes, this is my position, because she could have argued, for example, that we should be supporting the Democratic Party, regardless of their atrocity that they are funding against our people in Palestine, because they are a party that gives us access into the room. And perhaps by having access into the room, we can then slightly moderate the harm that our people face. She could have presented that, and then we could have had a dialogue. But to actually negate the entire question and to pretend that it's not an issue that we've been battling with is something that I do not value. I was also given this particular question afterwards. I had members of her campaign come and talk to me, and they say, you need to understand she's young, and there are things that she's thinking about in Georgia particularly, and maybe there could have been another way to have this conversation. And yes, maybe there could have been another way to have that conversation, but I don't think another way is what the time demanded. The time demanded a public facing for somebody who has made those positions very clear, somebody who has been asking us to vote for the Democrats despite their actions, not because of anything, but despite those actions. For somebody who claims that simply having a Palestinian voice at the Democratic National Convention would be enough. No, that's too low of a bar, regardless of the genocide. That's too low of a bar during apartheid. That's too low of a bar during occupation. To actually make that bar that low during genocide? No. The only way to confront it would be public.
Have you had the opportunity to connect with her after the fact?
No,
If you were to connect, hypothetically, what coaching would you give her at this point?
Oh, I don't think I'm the one to give her coaching, because I think we put too much weight on identity politics. I think the weight should be on politics itself and not on what you look like or if you share my religion. When I ran for parliament in Lebanon, when I was running as a member, to win the seat in parliament, which I knew that the chances that I would win would be very slight, but I ran anyway. And I was confronted by a group of women that were organizing as women voters. And they came up to me and they said, we are going to give you 50 votes, even though we disagree with your politics. And I told them, I find that to be very offensive and sexist. If you're only voting for me because I'm a woman, I would rather not have your vote. You vote for me because of the politics that I carry. And I would take that idea across to the United States. If the only reason I'm voting for somebody is because they are Arab or because they are Muslim, no, that's simply not good enough. That's not enough to be considered a comrade. Where do you stand on political issues? And let's talk about the politics. So again, if the only thing binding me to Ru'a is that we share an ethnicity, Unfortunately, that's not enough.
So I want to give you just some pushback. I feel like the argument is because she is young and she is learning that
Yes.
maybe it's worth taking her to the side and having a conversation or coaching her up. Do you just completely disagree with that?
No,
Or you,
I don't think that's my place to do that.
okay.
That's the thing. I think that that's her team to do that. The message and the messenger, as much as we would like to separate them, they can't be separated.
Yeah.
So even if I would be able to offer her the most brilliant coaching advice, she couldn't hear it from me, given what happened between me and her. The coaching needs to come from somebody within her campaign. And then she needs to be doing the assessment. What does she actually want from her political position? Which is the question we should ask anybody who's running for office. Why are you running for office? What do you want to achieve in that position? What kind of system do you want to be building? And then do we share your vision for what you want to be building? Do we share your vision on who are your allies? You know, I've got lots of examples in North Carolina, for example, of people who have stood by us politically who don't look like us and who have proven themselves to be brilliant, and others who do look like us and who had been campaigning that we should vote for them because they share our ethnicity and our religion, end up not supporting the values of economic justice that we are trying to uphold in North Carolina. So again, I would go back to what is the political position that they believe in, and how can they achieve that political position?
So your argument, which I agree with, is it's not enough to be Arab, it's not
Yes.
enough to be Muslim, and it's not enough
Yes.
to be Palestinian,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. So the values of what you're bringing to the table is actually what matters the most.
Yes. I mean, Mahmoud Abbas has made that very clear. It's not enough to be Palestinian. Could that man get any lower? We do, unfortunately, have a lot of examples of traitors. I'm not calling Ru'a a traitor before anybody accuses me of that. The word traitor is a really big one. I say that we as Arabs have traitors in our midst, and I'm just using that as another example that it's not enough to share ethnicity. Of course, it is always beautiful to find one who is not only a comrade, but also, you know, one of us. That would be amazing. And it would be beautiful to see more Rashida Tlaibs. That would be beautiful to see somebody like her who actually represents us in our many, well, represents me in my many politics and is one of us. That is beautiful if we can get that whole package. But I'm not willing to sacrifice my politics just to see my identity represented.
Right on. I completely agree with you. So as a segue to that, would you mind offering then your assessment of current Arab or Muslim politicians or Palestinian politicians, even
Yeah.
within the US?
When you first told me you were going to ask me that question, I went back to think, well, how do I assess where we are today unless I think about where we were? And if I start with where we were, then I'm really comfortable with how far we've gotten. If I start with where we are today and where we need to go, we've got a long way to go. But I need to recognize that it was in the 1940s that many of the Arabs in this country considered themselves to be white, that there was this attitude that we are white and we need to be aligning ourselves with the white man in the United States. And we need to be supporting those kind of principles, which, you know, are deeply problematic principles. So my politics, let me make it clear, I am a socialist who believes in economic justice and racial justice and recognizes that we are still, the United States is still a settler colony that very much lives up to the ideology of settler colonialism. So when I look at Arabs in particular in this country, who predominantly were Christian, by the way, when there were the first migrations, we've moved from being called white to now being called people of color. And I hope, I may be making an assumption here, I hope that that transition has more to do with our recognition of our similarities with other people of color communities and our stance in solidarity, and not simply an attempt to gain fervor through affirmative action, but to actually stand in solidarity. So there's been that move. I've also seen during the George Floyd protest, during the Black Lives Matter protest, how we had Arabs and African Americans standing side by side and protesting together, and not just with regards to Palestinians providing really needed advice on how to deal with tear gas during those protests, but also here. A prime example of that, of course, is Linda Sarsour, who is brilliant in merging the two communities and in recognizing that our liberations are tied. So with that recognition, when I look at Arabs today, I say, yes, we've come a long way through that recognition. We still have a while to go, of course, and party politics are difficult. And we are not a homogeneous community. Some of us are Republican, some of us are Democrat, some of us are Greens. There's a plethora. And many of us, unfortunately, continue to succumb to the idea that we don't want to deal with politics. You know, we say it in Arabic, "ما بدي أتعاطى سياسي," as if politics is a drug that you smoke and you don't want to deal with it, you know? So I would hope that all of us, Arabs, are not reach the recognition that whether or not we want to deal with politics, politics is dealing with us. So we better be active politically. So I say we've come a distance. We still have a very, very, very long distance to go.
These politicians within our community, what do you think they're getting right and what do you think they're getting wrong?
Well, which politicians in particular? Which politicians are you referring to?
I was hoping you would start picking some to talk about.
I mean, if we're talking about politicians, those elected in Congress, of course, we've got Rashida Tlaib,
Right.
who I have immense respect for, not just for her strong stance with regards to Palestinian liberation, but her strong stance on many other issues in which she represents folks in Michigan and she represents us all. So I look up to her positioning. I don't know if other Arab politicians in the United States, and please do remind me if there are those that I'm missing. Maybe there are a plethora on a local stance that are important. Ahmed Zahar in Michigan recently was elected into the school board, which is important. So I don't know. I haven't done an assessment of local Arab politicians and where we are in city councils, where we are as county commissioners, where we are as defense attorneys within the state rubric. So I really don't have enough information to be able to say, this is my stance on Arab politicians. I do hope that many of us are standing away from, and I will name names, I don't care, standing away from the Jim Zuhbi model. The Jim Zuhbi model of politicking that was very prominent in the 90s was, I will speak what is needed to get me into the room so that I have the ear of the politician, and then I will tell him what I think. And I remember what many of us at the ADC were telling him at that time was, by that time that you get into the room, who are you representing? Because you've given us up to get there. So I hope that more of us are not following that line and are following the line of speaking powerfully and recognizing that to speak powerfully, we need to have a base behind us.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I got to ask you, why aren't you running? I'd vote for you right now. I'd move to North Carolina, my family, and I'd vote for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm humbled with that. I've only been back in North Carolina for 3 years. I was in Lebanon for 18 years. And I guess the honest answer would be that I'm still terribly homesick. And I would rather be doing support for those who share my politics to be able to get them to that positioning, you know. So whatever coaching folks need who share my politics, I'm willing to do.
So just your opinion on Zohran Mamdani in New York. Do you have
Yes.
any assessment on him in particular? Because I had mentioned to you before we went live
Yeah,
where I
yeah.
felt he pivoted on the whole global intifada commentary.
Has pivoted on that. He's also pivoted on defunding the police. And if I have to choose between one or two, I think defunding the police is much more central to our struggle. To see him backtrack on defunding the police is what I find to be more alarming. Nevertheless, there is a model that he has shown us, the way to stand up powerfully by building that base, building it the old-fashioned way, which means not through social media, not through Facebook. We did organize before, door-to-door canvassing, and how to do that again, how to do that kind of organizing. I very much hope that he doesn't follow the Bernie Sanders model. As somebody who wore the shirt, we will vote for you, Ammu Bernie. Nevertheless, Bernie Sanders has shown us that twice he gets us to support him, and then he tries to get us to retain our votes within the Democratic Party. I hope that Zohran Mamdani actually continues to be firm to the ideals that have brought him to the stage and not try to push people into the right-wing Democratic Party.
See, I think these politicians within our community fall into the trap, and I mentioned this to you before we went on air, fall into this trap of thinking that they can play in this playground of duopoly go in there and fix things. But in reality, we've seen it. They get tainted. They start to adapt to that environment.
Yeah.
They become that environment. Maybe we could say that about AOC a little bit. I mean, maybe we could even
Oh,
say,
no, no. I never drank the Kool-Aid for AOC. I never thought she represented our ideals and our politics.
mm,
Um, Something just didn't sit right, you know? And she's not even a Bernie, she's a Nancy Pelosi. Yeah, I mean, politically, in the way that she's voting in Congress, she's not even there.
but my fear is no matter with this two-party
Yeah.
system specifically, and we're going to pivot to the Green Party,
Mhm.
obviously, but within the two-party system, they really believe in the representative in Georgia, Ruwan, as well. I
Yeah.
think he believes she can change the system from within using that two-party system. That's just not the case. It has been proven that we can't do that. And I know
Yeah.
there's more nuance to it, but should I really have hope to the fact that he's not going to pivot, Zoran specifically?
I don't think it has to do with hope, by the way. I think it has to do with organizing. I think the strength of that has to be, will his community give him space to pivot, or will his community force him to be true to the ideals that brought him into power? And the way to do that isn't just after election, you know, through letters, but to show him, look, if you don't do this, we have others. We have others who we will vote for. We are not loyal to persons. We are not loyal to parties. We are loyal to our ideals. And the more we can show that to politicians, you know, as community, as organizers, the harder it's going to be for them to pivot, for them to kind of merge. And they need that strength. And they also need to be really idealistical and really ideological. I love ideologies, by the way. And I also think we need to resurrect the beauty of political parties that have ideologies. I would challenge right now those who are members of the Democratic Party and those who are members of the Republican Party. What is your ideology? Really break it down. What is the ideology? And then hold your party to the ideology that you claim your party believes in. Not that I think your party believes in, but that you claim your party believes in. Hold them to that. And the ideology cannot be, I am not the orange man. That's not an ideology. The ideology cannot be, I am not the other. It cannot be a negation of the other. The ideology has to be something firm within oneself. Just like I can tell you what socialists believe in and what that means. I can tell you what resistance should look like and what that means, what identity is, and why I don't consider myself to be Lebanese, but I consider myself to be from the artificially divided lands of Greater Syria. I could break that down. And I hold then for every politician and every member of a political party to do that within their community and to do that for themselves and then hold them accountable to that.
Greater Syria. Unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, in a heartbeat, very simple. Those of us from present day Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, we were very familiar with Sykes Picot and the way we had a British and a Frenchman come to our lands and create boundaries within our lands based on how divisive they want our new country states to become. Lebanon is a prime example where the borders of Lebanon were designed specifically to have a majority Maronite population in Lebanon so that the Maronite population can be more attuned politically to France, rather than to have a majority Greek Orthodox population that would be more attuned to the East. Think about designing borders with that in mind. So if we reject the idea of a colonizer coming in and dividing our lands, then we should consequently reject the consequence of that division. It's really very simple. So as somebody who rejects what the colonizer did and the consequence of that division, why should I hold on to an identity that was created and that was created particularly to divide me? So yes, I carry a Lebanese citizenship. Yes, that Lebanese citizenship gave me immense privileges in Lebanon, but I do not believe that Palestine is any less mine than Lebanon is, nor that Syria is any less mine than Lebanon is, and vice versa. So just as I claim Palestine and Syria, I would also allow Palestinians and Syrians to claim Lebanon because it is equally theirs if we reject the consequences. Now, if I'm going to say I don't have a problem with a colonizer coming in, then hold on to the identity that they created. But I find too many of us are in objection to Sykes-Picot, but we hold on to the consequence of Sykes-Picot. And that contradiction just doesn't sit right with me. So that's it in a very simple nutshell. That's what it means to me.
So we should change all of our maps to Greater Syria starting today. I'm going to go ahead and go do that after this interview.
Yeah, to Bilad Sham, and have fun with that and what that means. And particularly to be able to tell the colonizer and to tell the Europeans and to tell the Americans, we are the ones that determine our identity, not they. We are the ones who determine who we are. And our identity is not something that they can choose. And then they force us to fit within that rubrics.
I have to ask, your courage is just so palpable. I mean, you know exactly what you think and you feel, and you state it so eloquently. Where does that come from?
Well, it's not courage. I mean, if I were to say this with a gun pointed at my head, then maybe you could say that. But I don't feel it has anything to do with courage. I feel it simply has to do with knowing who we are. I've been blessed to be a child of a political party. All my family are members of a particular political party that is very ideological, and I was steeped within that ideology. But I really don't think this has anything to do with courage or anything special. The courage, I still think, are men and women who are fighting the amazing victories that we're still seeing today in Gaza. We're still seeing amazing fighters. It is unbelievable. Really, if we were to read 200 years from now, the stories that are coming out of Gaza, just regarding the fighters, the resistance fighters in Gaza, I am sure our children's children would think that we were making it up. So those are the courageous ones. Those are the courageous ones, the people who still find the strength to stay standing in their land, be it in Gaza, be it in Nasra, Bijaramana, Biswaida, in South Lebanon, wherever they are, the people who remain standing in the face of difficulty, they're the courageous. I'm middle class, there's nothing courageous about what I'm saying. Ask me again if the FBI come knocking.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, you are putting yourself out there. I mean, nothing compares to the people in Palestine and Gaza, obviously, but we have people who are just afraid to speak up and lose their jobs and lose their wealth. And you've been doing this for so long, I think since the 90s.
I mean, I've lost 3 jobs, in the US and in Lebanon for my politics. And I recognize that it's a privilege to be able to speak what I do, because every time my job was threatened, I knew I had the economic space to live without that job. And I think that's really important for us. When I was working at the American University of Beirut and I was threatened by the provost and the president, and I would reach out to get support from other faculty members, I understood what it meant to stand in solidarity, that there is a space of privilege for those professors who didn't have tenure, for those professors who had bills to pay and debts to pay. They couldn't. They felt that they could not publicly stand with me because they could lose their jobs. Versus for me, and just like I told the provost, I'm a single woman with no kids. Come at me. What do I have to lose? I have no dependents. But to say that and to acknowledge that privilege, which makes me in greater awe of workers, of those who build labor unions, of those who are right now on the front lines at Amazon warehouses and are standing shoulder to shoulder, and they are putting their jobs on the line, and they barely have minimum wage and livable wages, and they're fighting. I mean, that is courageous. That is really courageous. And what can we do to make sure that whenever we call for the liberation of our lands, that we're also side by side with those building labor unions where we are?
Okay, I'll let you off the hook here, but I gotta say, even if you were married with kids, I think you'd be the exact same person. And if
I would
not
be.
anything, you probably get your kids to speak up and be even louder. So,
I would hope they would be, yes.
so I want to pivot to the Arab and Muslim Green Party
Yeah.
Caucus.
Mhm.
What is that? How is that created? And what is
Uh-huh.
the objective of that group?
So the Arab and Muslim Caucus is within the Green Party, and it is a space for organizing. And I found that whenever spaces for organizing are created, even within a larger space for organizing, it allows for more organizing. So just that simple. So this is a caucus of individuals who recognize that Palestine is our compass. And I would argue that every member of the Green Party also recognizes Palestine is the compass, as the Green Party leadership recognizes. But having a caucus just allows us to be organizing things simpler. And so there's a caucus in the Green Party for Arabs and Muslims. I'm not a very big fan of the name, but nevertheless, here we are, we can organize. So it's an organizing space.
And what is your role?
I am the person who helps with public speaking and public appearances. When they first reached out and they said, there's this caucus, could you join? I said, sure. And what could you do? And I said, well, I've been a public speaking instructor for 20 years. If anybody wants to speak in public, I'd love to do that training. And next thing I know, Mark had reached out to you, and here I am.
So you're a trained public speaker. So that makes sense to me here.
I've been giving public talks since I was 14, and I learned the hard way what works and what doesn't. And sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't. But I think for every one of us who speaks, the times that we don't get it right are just as important as the times that we do get it right, so we can understand what works and what doesn't work. And I absolutely love supporting other people to overcome any anxiety or any fears they have in speaking in public, and making sure that what they say in a manner that can best reach those that they want to reach, while, of course, being true to who they are and the beliefs that they have.
But with the Arab and Muslim Green Party caucus, what's the metric of success? If we're looking at this in 10 years from now, how do we know we're successful?
What I would love is for a caucus to be successful by finding itself to be unnecessary. So imagine then if the Green Party itself becomes in 10 years, well, in 10 years, it would not be likely. Let's say in 20 years, becomes a party that no longer has to fight for ballot access, but that gets regular ballot access because it has enough representatives to have that ballot access. And where every Green Party leadership, wherever they are, be them in local or state or federal representation, and I hope that this is the case because this is an ideological political party, would be open to all members within their party and would be pushing the principles that those of us within the Arab and Muslim caucus hold most dear. And I think as an organizer, ultimately what we all want is for us to be doing something else. We do this work so that we no longer have to do this work. This is not work that we should be doing forever.
So if you could change the name, what would it be? Just curious.
I just don't feel comfortable with identities in terms of uplifting it in that way. I don't know. I'm also not very good with names, so I'd have to think on that one. I have found it interesting how there's been this coming together of Arabs and Muslims, even though the vast majority of Muslims in this country are not Arab. And previously, the vast majority of Arabs in this country were not Muslim. So this bringing together of these two identities I find to be interesting, saying it as a Southerner. And I also find and believe this very much to be true, that religious identity really should be a personal identity. It is one's personal relationship to God. And what should be more public is our political identity. So one could be a socialist Muslim, and maybe, I'm not sure, maybe one could be a capitalist Muslim. So which Muslim are you? And let that be the writing force. Same with Arab. We all know a lot of Republicans out there. So, well, hold on. What is the binding force between them? So what is the common element for folks? And even when we say Palestine is our compass, what does that actually mean? How do we translate that on a daily basis? What does that mean for who we want to become? Those are the questions that I would like to be dissecting to then determine what would be a great name, But ultimately, because it is the Green Party and not the Democratic Party, I think the naming becomes of less significance. If it were the Democratic Party, then yes, I would be arguing we need to be highlighting these identities because these identities are being threatened within the Democratic Party, or we need to be highlighting these principles because they are threatened within the Democratic Party. The Green Party is an ideological party. So just being a member of the Green Party makes it very clear where your politics stand. That's not so clear within the Democratic Party.
Yeah. So I'm Arab, I'm Muslim. How do I support the Green Party?
Just come join the Green Party. And my suggestion would be join the Green Party where you are, because the best kind of organizing is local organizing. So whatever state you live in, join the Green Party in that way, and become an organizer in that way. Figure out what is happening in your community, like your city, your county. What is happening there? How can you be uplifting issues there? And ultimately do the work that brings you joy. What makes you happy? And try to connect that to the politics that you believe in. Figure out how you can be centering Palestine in everything that you do and in everything that you say.
Yep, for sure. I did vote for Jill Stein and Butch Ware. I actually lost a client because I was so vocal, just so you know, for Jill Stein.
I'm still getting hate mail by the dozen, so.
All good, all good. So let's talk about your real job now. You're an environmental scientist, right? You're obviously very talented in many areas, but I think this is the core and maybe this is the focus of your career, more or less. Is that fair to say?
I've never been very career driven. I've been more issue driven. So I decided to study trees for 10 years in college because I found the poetry of trees to be very embracing. And because when I went home, I was told that Lebanon needs a forester. So I studied trees. But the whole time I was looking at forest from a social justice perspective. And I continue to find the model that mother trees give in a forest to be the ultimate model of our lives. I don't know how familiar you are with mother trees.
That was one of my questions. Could you actually
My
educate us?
God.
Yeah.
Like I would walk into a class back when I was teaching at the university and say, trees are socialist, ask me how, and just, I get chills. If there is a divine, I think the divine lives in trees. So mother trees are these old, large trees that we find in forest. And these are forests that are naturally grown, not forest with trees that grow in a greenhouse and are then planted monoculturally. The trees have to grow in a forest. And we can talk about why that's important later on. So the mother trees are these very large trees you find in forest. And for every tree, by the way, whatever you see above ground, it's double the size underground. The roots are double the size, which goes back to organizing, by the way. Whatever you see up front, it takes double the time to do the work, double the organizing. But anyway, these mother trees, from a capitalist perspective, one would have thought that they hoard nutrients, that they take everything the soil has to give them so they can be strong. Turns out they don't do that. They actually get their root system to work underground, identify who are the trees that are in need. There's a sick tree out there. There's a tree that's harmed. There's a tree that's not being able to get nutrients. And they provide for others. They provide for others, and they also help other trees communicate. I still get chills. Just the idea of this is unbelievable. So then if we take that to a human level, and I would argue this is how we as humans have lived for centuries before capitalism. We lived as communities. We lived as communities in which the elders shared knowledge, in which everybody received what they needed to receive, and people were not hungry and people were not thrown aside. Just like in a family, a good, kind, loving family that many of us have been privileged to experience, that is how we are. So what would that look like if we take that economy and build that kind of an economy? And in these forests, by the way, they're heterogeneous. They're multi-generational, they're multi-species. So again, what would our lives look like if we are the same, if we welcome diversity and we welcome people who behave differently and look differently and are of different ages, and we took care of each other like a forest takes care of each other. So that is the mother tree. So basically I studied 10 years of science and then did economic justice work and environmental justice organizing. I had the privilege to be teaching at the university level in Lebanon for 18 years, where I taught leftist environmental science, which is to make sure our students graduate with humility and not with arrogance. And I find too often people get a degree and they think that they know. Yeah. But I think degrees should teach us to be humble and know that there's more out there that we don't know, rather than the opposite. And then 3 years ago, I was invited to come back to North Carolina and co-direct an organization called the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. And we do environmental justice organizing on an intersectional basis, highlighting how environmental justice at its core is the marriage of workers' rights and civil rights at its very core. And, people can check us up on the web, ncejn.org. They can subscribe to our newsletter that I produce twice a week, which has a slew of news, and which, of course, Palestine is central because it is the environmental justice topic of our time. It is the justice issue of our time. It is, for anyone out there doing anything, Palestine is central to your work. Be you a doctor, be you a teacher, be you a writer. The mere fact that you're a human who breathes, Palestine should be central to your work.
So true or false? I mean, I already know the answer, but dramatic effect. True or false? This pop-up entity that they call Israel is committing ecocide.
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. And if we define ecocide as, think of the ides, insecticide, something that kills insects. Genocide, the deliberate, intentional decimation of a people. Ecocide is the deliberate decimation of an ecosystem. What kind of a people, what kind of a community would celebrate throwing cement into water wells? What kind of a community, what kind of a thinking would celebrate bulldozing 18,000 olive trees? And all of this happened, by the way, in the West Bank before the beginnings of the genocide in Gaza. What kind of a community would applaud this and find it to be necessary? What kind of a community would look at the heterogeneity of our forest in Palestine, the shrubbery, all the cacti, all of these magnificent indigenous plants and say, no, 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 we're going to uproot them. And we're going to be planting European pine trees and treating these pine trees as soldiers and making sure that the forest is homogeneous because, of course, that's how they are. They're supremacist and they want to impose a supremacy over the land. So the fact that Zionism and Zionists and all who support Zionism impose ecocide on the land of Palestine is perfectly natural to the ideology of Zionist because it is a supremacist, extractivist ideology. And they are most definitely committing ecocide in Gaza. You can look at the numbers of what has been decimated in terms of agricultural fields, in terms of plants, in terms of animals. And let us not forget that we as humans are an animal. And so when you harm humans, you also harm the ecosystem. We can look at the kind of weapons that they have imposed and tested on Gaza. The fact that we have seen pictures of people whose bodies have evaporated. What kind of weapon is this? What is it doing to the land? What is it doing to the soil? What is it doing to the air? It takes a particular kind of horrific human being to be celebrating that kind of atrocity. The same individual who would celebrate target practice on our children is the very same individual that would bulldoze our olive trees and destroy our water wells and prohibit our people from even fishing. So yes, the Zionist state is committing ecocide and has been committing ecocide since it was imposed on our lands in the 1940s.
That's a great segue because in 2006, you testified in the Court of Conscience
Yes.
on Israel's war on Lebanon. Do you see a familiar approach to 2006 to now? I mean, obviously it's a genocide, so it's much worse, but
It's much worse.
yeah.
It's really much worse. One of the things that I looked into in 2006 is what weapons were used. And I remember, and that was a war that I lived through, and I remember looking at the bunker buster bombs that Israel used in Lebanon in 2006 and looking at the patent of the bunker buster bomb. And they could either be having tungsten or be using depleted uranium. Depleted uranium is cheaper. What do you think they used? We did not have enough scientific information to prove or disprove that they used depleted uranium. There was enough information to question that. Well, the harms of depleted uranium are huge, as we know when the US used them in Iraq and when the US used them in Afghanistan. Huge impacts on the soil, on the vegetation, and massive increases in different kinds of cancer on humans, as well as increases in birth defects. Depleted uranium may have been used in 2006. In addition to the use of these weaponry and the use of white phosphorus, there's also the danger of simple cluster bombs. We think cluster bombs are now so old-fashioned because the military-industrial complex has produced so much more horrific weaponry. But we think of cluster bombs maybe as Russian dolls that can be presented in different sizes. Think of them being lodged into fruit trees. Think of them lodged into vegetables, lodged in the soil. And here you are as a farmer wanting to go back to your land. They are a continually killing machine. And Israel, as we remember, in the last 3 days of the so-called ceasefire imposed in 2006, when a ceasefire was declared 3 days later, in those last 3 days of the war, they emptied out all their cluster bomb munition. So when we think about the environmental impact, we think not only of the impact on the land and the soil, but also the impact on agriculture. And we think about also what was destroyed. If we look at the homes that were destroyed in the southern suburbs of Beirut, otherwise known as the Dahi, a lot of those homes were built at a time when asbestos was regularly used in the home. So when you destroy those homes, what have you done to air quality? So we study all of this, what weapons were used, what was destroyed, what was being allowed to be cleaned up. The Israelis also bombed a fuel munition that, of course, the Lebanese authorities had so wisely, quote unquote, put right along the coast. So the devastation that imposed on the entire Mediterranean Sea, reaching all the way to Cyprus and Greece, what also was bombed, as well as what was denied. So there was immense environmental harm in the 2006 war that the Lebanese are still suffering from, in addition to the fact that Israel continues to bomb Lebanon on an almost regular basis. And now we have the so-called Lebanese leadership wanting to do the most absurd, treasonous act of disarming Hezbollah, which would be truly the ultimate act of treason. We look at all of these, magnify them by more than 10 to simply get a sense of the horrors that have been imposed on Gaza by Israel and the United States and the European Union.
So I'm not an expert on the environment, obviously, and it's not like I'm looking for the news, but
Okay.
why aren't more of these scientists speaking up for Palestine and for Lebanon?
Why aren't they? Really, why aren't they? There is no justifiable scientific reason. There is no justifiable ethical reason. I would argue that they don't consider our lives to be worthy of the time. They don't consider our lives to be worthy of their time. It really just boils down to that. Palestine should be the cry for every single environmental justice organizer in the United States, and that's not the case. Palestine should be the cry for every single climate change organizer in the United States, and that's not the case. It should be the cry for every single environmental scientist in the United States, and that is not the case. Why are our lives deemed so disposable, deemed so, invisible?
Yeah.
And of course, it boils down to racism, and it boils down to this country is still living the legacy of settler colonialism.
So what do we do about that? So for our listeners and then the individuals watching, who do we reach out to about the environment? Who do we sort of bang on their door and say, hey, you got to speak up?
Oh, to everyone that you know. I mean, really, I would argue to everyone that you know.
Well, specifically for the environment.
Well, so you have the environmental movement and you have the environmental justice movement, and we're not the same. So the Nature Conservancy is one of these big greens that calls itself an environmental organization, but they are in bed with the U.S. military. And I found that to be really contradictory, given that the U.S. military is the number one institutional polluter in the United States, if not in the entire world. So hold on, who are you sleeping with here? Yeah, and the environmental movement specifically, those who argue for environmental rights tend to dismiss the rights of humans. And I argue that many of those organizations in the environmental movement are also remnants of European supremacy, because they consider humans to be separate from the environment, which is a very colonial ideology. It's not a natural indigenous philosophy. The environmental justice movement, however, centers people. So they have no justification whatsoever for not uplifting the crisis. And the argument that many make is, well, it's an international issue. I want to work on local issues. But if our representatives in this country can get away with committing genocide with our dollars and with our votes, then there is nothing that they would not be doing. Just in the same venue that I argue, as an environmental justice organizer, not only should we be uplifting the liberation of Palestine, we also need to be melting ICE, melting the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, because that is an unconstitutional, militarized, so-called police force in this country that will have impacts on all of us, not simply the undocumented and not simply those who look undocumented, but everybody. So those are two central issues, I argue, to environmental justice and to environment and to healthcare and to economic justice and to education and on and on and on. So my advice is know who's an organizer in your community and bring it up. Feel free to reach out to me. I can give talks on how these issues are local and we need to be centering them. I can provide really clear information on how these are all local issues. And we need to be using that to build an intersectional fight so we can actually achieve liberty. Reach out to any groups that you are a paid member of and raise this also as an alarm. Hey, do you know about so-and-so? And take it forward. But really, reach out to me and I'll send you the particular material that I have been building and using to elevate this. And if you are in North Carolina, come out to our summit, where Palestine and ICE will be central issues as we talk about environmental justice in North Carolina.
So how do we reach out to you and how did we follow you?
Very simple. Just Google me, Rania at ncijn.org, and I will reply to your email and get in touch. You can also follow me on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. DM me, and then we can reach out further.
Wonderful. Rania, you are brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I want to leave you with the final words. Anything you want to say to the audience as we wrap up?
Yeah, there is one question that folks have been asking me for 10 years now, which is, how hopeful are you? Are you hopeful? And before, I used to answer by giving like this rational answer as to, oh, this is how much hope there is because of 1, 2, 3. And lately I've realized that that's not accurate. And I think the question itself needs to be dismantled. We do not fight for Palestine because we are hopeful. That's not why we fight. We fight for Palestine because there is no other option out there. Either we succumb to the oppression and we are willing to be guillotined by the oppressor in one way or another, be it by literally having our families be massacred in Gaza, or be massacred in Nabatiyi, or be massacred wherever they are in our homeland, or be crippled here in the United States, or we resist and organize and we face a possibility of liberation. And I think that's what we need to hold on to. We only have 2 choices: defeat, acceptance, which will lead to only more death and destruction, or organize and resist. And there's that possibility of liberation. And I would also encourage everyone, spend 1 hour a week envisioning what that liberation would look like and what kind of a political, economic, social system we will build when Palestine is freed. And really think about it. Be planning that liberation. Give yourself 1 hour a week so that your lungs can grow as we continue the fight.
As always, brilliant. I'm going to have to invite you back on. So anytime you want to come back on, you just let me know.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for some mood.